My name is Dan Cooperman, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this discussion section. Our topic today is going to be the adoption of technology within corporate law departments. And with me to discuss that topic, I've got some great colleagues. First, immediately to my left, Graham Allan, who is the Deputy General Counsel of Cisco. And he has a strong interest in this area. Formerly was a partner in London for Baker & McKenzie and has spent a good deal of time with Cisco in the area of implementation of technology within the department. So, Graham, we're delighted to have you. I have to say, Graham is a last-minute substitution for Mark Chandler, who unfortunately this morning had to turn us down because of the press of work. So I'm particularly grateful for Graham stepping in at the very, very last moment. Then to Graham's right, as you're looking at him, Karen Corrle, who is another dear colleague of mine, many, many years as a general counsel here in the Valley, Adobe, Raycam, and others. And Karen retired from Adobe 2 years ago, is that right? And is now a senior counsel at Sidley and Austin. So welcome, Karen. Happy to have you. And then to Karen's left, to your right, is Greg McPolin. Greg is the general manager of Pangea 3, which many of you may know is one of the leading legal outsourcing firms, one that really is at the forefront of the integration of technology within law departments and law firms. So, Greg, we are thrilled to have you. And your former colleague is to your left, and that's Kevin Colangelo. And Kevin is now with Bloomberg BNA, where he is the vice president, head of strategic accounts for Bloomberg Law in New York. And has spent many, many years in the business, both with BNA as well as before that with Pangea 3, and himself is an attorney who's practiced in New York for several major firms in this area, as well as just practicing law. So,
always practicing.
And my own claim here is that I don't have the depth of knowledge that these guys do, but I did run the law department as general counsel for Oracle for many, many years, and then most recently for Apple. And I am now a senior counsel with DLA Piper, and connected here at the law school as a member of the advisory council for the Law Science and Technology Group, which is what sponsors Codex. And I'm also a fellow here at the Rock Center. So, what I've asked the panel members to do, and we'll start it this way, is to describe one or two significant technology projects that they have implemented at their companies in the last several years, and to describe that project in sufficient detail that we understand the context in which the problem was identified, how this issue is being addressed through the project, through the technology project, and how it went. That is, within the department, how was it possible to get funding for this project, which for a law firm or a law department is a major concern. What are the cultural issues that surrounded the implementation of a major project, and what is the outcome in terms of collaboration among groups, training, project management, and the like? So I've asked them to do that, and then we'll have a reflection a little bit about projects generally. What's on the horizon? What are companies now thinking about? What are some of the cutting-edge issues as we look forward? I would invite your questions, but I'm going to have to ask you to hold them until the end, just so we don't get off track. I will try to leave time for questions. And I'm also asked to remind you that you should have evaluation forms somewhere close to your desks there. And the management strongly encourages all of you to complete those forms and to submit them so that we can improve this program every year. And it's a great program. So with that, let me turn first, Karen, to you and ask for your thoughts and guidance on projects that have been implemented in the departments that you've managed.
So I'm a big fan of technology in internal legal departments being a good way to leverage your resources to interact more consistently and sometimes in a more friendly manner with your clients to increase efficiency and also to get much better data out of the work that you're doing so that you can make changes. That being said, I think implementing technology in internal legal departments is very difficult. And I think for Cisco has always had, been sort of a superstar out there and had a great deal more resources than other legal departments have to implement. So you have to start with that. I'll just tell you some of the systems that we implemented, and they're just some of many, and then I'll talk a little bit about contract management. So, we implemented patent systems, we implemented export control, data flows, subsidiary processes, M&A processes, e-signature processes, gift policies, compliance, a lot of compliance systems like implemented with technology. But the contract management is probably the most interesting story. When I came to Adobe in 2002, at a prior software company, we had actually implemented a contract management system, and this was in probably 2000. And when I came to Adobe, we didn't have one. And so we started a big project to see what implementing a contract management system would look like. And
could you speak up a little? Sorry.
Yeah, is this not on? It must not be on.
I think that's recording. No, there it is.
Maybe just pull it a little closer to you.
So we started implementing a contract management system.
Is that better? Can't tell you.
Okay, I'll talk really loud. I've never been accused of not.
Please speak up if you can't hear the panel.
So, we did an assessment and figured out it was going to be really expensive. So I just said, can I just have X thousands of dollars, and implemented one within legal just so we could track what we were doing, really as a content management system as opposed to a process system. And then SOX came in, and the company kind of liked our contract management system, and so we used that for a number of years to and made it much more of a workflow. Fortunately, we had our own technology, Acrobat Solutions, and so we were able to implement a workflow solution for contract management. But we eventually decided we wanted to do quote to cash, and outside systems were getting better, although I would say the choices were still not great. We had actually worked with some of the vendors early on, and then had decided to continue on with our own system. So we started implementing a contract management system, and I'll just talk about the complexities in switching over and doing a quote to cash system, which I believe is you have to look at your volume to see if it's justified. We clearly had a very high volume of contracts and many different types of contracts, so it just wasn't one type of contract. And really what you have to do is you have to sit down, you have to get every stakeholder in the organization, and you have to sit in a room and say, what are the requirements? And in our case, it took about 40 people 2 days just doing nothing but trying to figure out what you wanted out of the system. And, if you just want a content management system, that's easy. If you want a workflow system, that's very difficult because you have to make sure you're connecting properly with your revenue recognition systems, your sales systems, et cetera. So you guys have probably done this in your sleep, but it was hard. I think the, getting the standardization, getting everybody's buy-in, the pros are that you get standardization, you get the data, you get compliance, which is a big thing, certainly with some types of clauses. The ideal is to get a contract builder system. That's not so easy and takes time, but the amount of resources it takes to build these systems cannot be underestimated. The cons are you have to roll this out internationally, and that entails a lot of different concerns, a lot of different stakeholders, and requires a lot of training. So I guess my point is there's a huge amount of internal resources in thinking that has to go into this. Also, with the off-the-shelf systems that are now available, and they're not really off-the-shelf, but with the commercial systems that are available, you're going to have to make some trade-offs because they won't do everything our homegrown system did, for example. So, but you have to weigh that against getting the complete system that makes it very easy for your salespeople, for your accounting people, and for your customers. And I will put in a plug here for making sure you have electronic signatures built into it. I mean, that it just, and my view is if you automate the contracts at a point where both for your customers and your salespeople, the amount of negotiation you will do will go down a lot. In addition, I think if you can do my other view is that if you do a contract clause builder system, that you'll be able to figure out what's really causing trouble in your contracts and revisit those clauses pretty often to see how you can make them more amenable to both you and your customers and sort out conflicts and see if you can figure out a way to fix those conflicts before it gets to negotiation.
Well, thanks, Karen. Did you have, as you were designing the contract management system at Adobe, did you run into any pushback from your internal tech people who said, hey, wait a minute, you know, you're describing, we can do that?
No, because we had already had an outside vendor build the system we were using, and everybody knew how much time it took. We were starting to outgrow that vendor was the problem, and it was we were pretty much solely reliant on that vendor, and there was some concern about that. So, no, I think the bigger concern is trying to trade off the internal technology departments their priorities versus the legal department's priorities. Mm-hmm. That is where the trade-offs come in, whether it be security, there's just a lot of different concerns, and you have to make sure all those concerns get on the table, and then you consciously, compromise which ones you're going to, where you're going to end up on each of those.
It's interesting because, of course, we're here in Silicon Valley, the land of technology, and I can say from personal experience, both trying to build a whole number of different projects, but a billing system, a matter management system, a knowledge management system. Every single time, we identified one of these projects as something we would like to do in the legal department. Our tech people at Apple and at Oracle said, hey, we can do that. You don't need to go out and hire anybody. And we had a big row about this and trying to persuade senior management that no, really, we needed to go outside. This is not something that we could do on our own. I think my success rate was about 50% on that score, and I must say the times that I lost that battle, I really suffered because the system that was ultimately developed just was not something that was usable, and we ended up having to go outside anyway.
Did it at least look really cool?
Yeah.
I think, right? I mean,
it depends on which
the
company.
UI was great.
There was one company where it looked really cool.
We did have a couple of projects that were actually built not with our IT groups, but with our user groups. So since we had software engineers, it's easy for us to do that. And for example, our export control system, we sort of figured out where the bumps in the system were, and then they designed an automatic system. And that was, so you can partner with your own technical, people not in IT.
Can I ask you a question? Is that all right?
Mm-hmm.
Is this allowed? Inter-panel questions?
But I'm glad you asked my permission.
Okay. I'm always fascinated by the conversations that our clients are often having internally when they are trying to justify going out and either bringing in technology, buying technology, or getting your internal, development teams to create technology. So could you talk a little bit about how you ultimately justified, because that's an expense, right? That's going right to SG&A. So how did you, did you say, well, this is going to allow our frontline salespeople to close deals much more quickly. You're going to, increase the velocity of sales or right. How did you sort of justify, sort of more expense into, an already, expense generating department as opposed to a profit generating department?
I think that it's pretty easy. You take, you're not always successful, but for example, in contract management, if you can actually electronically implement a lot, you don't need as many lawyers. I mean,
Right.
because you just don't. A lot of people will click through, and I agree, on an electronic signature and be done with it, many more so than if you send them a contract in an email. So there's a big efficiency thing. The problem is quantifying that efficiency. That's where it gets really hard.
Yep.
And on something like export control or something like software audits, when you can justify it often by seeing how much pain is being caused in the development organization. Again, anecdotal, right? So I think you have to look at each particular piece of technology and say, how is it that this is going to improve or may improve our services, improve our user experience and our customer experience, and how is it that, and what is the cost of doing that? The thing for me that always had me stumble was the implementation time and cost.
Sure.
That is the biggest
painful,
issue,
right.
and that's why SaaS systems, honestly, are just so much better, because they just, you can just implement with very little work. I mean, no work, but a lot less work than designing the system and building it. But, we've gone down the path with some vendors and then pulled the plug on the system because it just wasn't doing what they said it was going to do.
Now, I got to say, the very best justification for a project, of course, is that it is good for the business. Not just that it's good for the department, it's good for the business itself. It helps us create value for our customers. And this is something I think that Cisco has done brilliantly. So, Graham, let me turn it over to you and describe that aspect of it, as well as the various projects that have recently been embraced by Cisco.
I think and this builds nicely, I think, off what Karen said. For us, we've always had a large capability to invest in IT projects, but it's not because we have some boondoggle budget that we can flex whenever we want to. Essentially, Mark Chandler, who's my boss and our general counsel, has a choice. He can invest in more people, he can invest in more technology, or he could invest in more outside services. Those are all things that he's expected to assess as to what's the right play. So the budget we create for developing IT projects very much comes out of looking at our overall department budget and seeing where we can get a better return through leveraging technology. And I would add, and I'll perhaps drill into this, workflow re-engineering than through additional lawyers or perhaps buying additional services in the market, whether from law firms or outsourcing capabilities or whatever it might be. And just to really illustrate this point, we built and we've had a lot of success in building what I'll call standalone IT capabilities within our department. We've had approval processes since 99, which were online to allow for contract review and approval capabilities. We built a click accept engine in the early 2000s when there really wasn't anything on the market that you could leverage. We took a decision back then to build a generic click accept engine that could be deployed in multiple environments rather than hard-coded with one workflow. So, for example, our click accept engine is still used today to underpin our NDA tool. Anyone in the company can use the workflows and the click accept engine to create any NDA to go with any arrangement that they're contemplating. It's also used to underpin offers of employment that we send out. It is used to underpin our renewals with our channel partners. There's a variety of different things we've been able to do by recycling the same technology. I think the biggest challenge that's come for us has been glue. How do you connect these bits together into some overall architecture and make sure that it is essentially building upon each other to create an end-to-end capability? So, for example, Karen talked about creating a contract management database or system. We've had one of those for quite some time. How do you start leveraging that for the data that's within it in a structured, logical way? Well, you have to make sure the data is getting into it in the right way to be able to extract. Increasingly now, intelligent searching capability and so forth maybe mitigates that risk a little bit. But you've got to start thinking about how you build layer upon layer upon layer. And we spend a lot of time trying to think that through, and also trying to think through the adoption capabilities that will go with that. I have no idea if this story is true, but it's always a story that's stuck with me. There's a Greenfield University in the UK, and I'm always surprised when I say Greenfield and people look at me and go, what is a Greenfield? And in California at this time of year, Greenfields are not very common anyway. But essentially, literally, it is where a new campus was built out on farmland. And it's the University of Warwick, which was built in the 60s. And they built out the campus. All the buildings were built out, and the main sort of arteries between them were built. And they came to landscape. And rather than do the landscaping, what they did was they basically covered the entire campus in gravel and sand. And they just let the students walk around. So they figured out there's a strong path between the cafeterias and the bar and the library and back to the bar and back to the bar and back to the dorms eventually. And these paths started to appear. And then they filled in the landscaping all around that. And we have had many an occasion, frankly, where we've just assumed that if we build a certain technology that looks exciting to our clients, the sales force, the engineering teams, finance, whoever that audience might be, that they'll adopt this thing. And you've got to make sure that you really have figured out that pathway in advance of starting to implement. And we've had to reverse course on that on a number of occasions where we've not been clear as to where that would go. We do bring everything back to your point about the value proposition. We do bring everything back to an ROI. We try to calculate a minimum value that we expect to bring back to the business before we go down any of these endeavors. They're never nice to have projects. Karen's right. There is an affordability play. You know what the average cost of a lawyer is in a given jurisdiction, or contracts professional, or paralegal, or program manager, whatever it might be. And you can start to make those trade-offs. It's great when you can deliver that back to the field. And we have a fundamental premise that we won't put burden on our sales force, and certainly not on our customers. But if we can take burden away from them and take burden away from ourselves, it's a beautiful thing. And that's why some of the simple implementations like a non-disclosure click accept tool can come to play, because someone has to ring you up or send you an email or walk down the corridor and talk to you and say, can you create this document for me? And if in the time that it would take them to set out that information, if you to maybe have that back and forth, you can get everything you need by them just pushing it into the tool, and it spits it out, and you don't know, and you can just see this thing being tracked ultimately back into your database because it's a closed loop. It's a fabulous thing. The field is happy because they don't have to waste time when you don't return their call, or you miss their email, or they walk down to your cube and you're not there. We're happy because it takes work off us. We're double happy because it's in a contained loop, and the click accept tool brings the document back into our systems once it's being counter-executed by the other party. And it's a nice thing, but you've got to make sure that there is that cultural adoption, that people will embrace that. And we sit down and we calculate, how many of these things do we do? How much time do we think we spend on these? Try to size that up in terms of the overall legal department, the impact on our clients, and then bring that back as ROI. We have to hit that. That's part of our measures of success.
Graham, one of the things that Mark Chandler has described to me, which I've always been very impressed with, actually going way back even to the early 2000s, has been Cisco's ability to automate the M&A process within the legal department. I think that's really been exceptional. And I wondered if you could describe the implementation of that project and how it's working, and how it really has proven value to the company rather than, again, just the legal department, to demonstrate or underscore kind of what we were talking about before, about the need to demonstrate that value.
Sure. Yeah, and perhaps the most interesting area to think about there is less about what I'll call the upfront stages, because I think that's an increasingly known space, right? So the creation of virtual deal rooms and the way in which you can have layers of disclosure within that will satisfy various different groups on a transaction. To me, the most interesting area where I think we've had some good returns has come out of the integration piece. And we spend very, very little on that set of activities externally, virtually nothing actually, because we've been able to leverage a whole bunch of systems to essentially assess what it is that we're getting, right? From a contractual perspective, from a patent perspective, from a trademark perspective, what are the different assets that are coming into the business? And then how do you push those to the right groups so that they can immediately start to absorb them within their own systems? And that has been, again, a sort of automated workflows, minimal human supervision over those things. and you can leverage your outside law firms who are perhaps doing all of the pulling together the physical paper documentation to be the push capability. And once it's into the systems, it will then flow through to the right groups, and they can enable what they need to do downstream without the need for intermediate lawyers or intermediary lawyers to get involved in that process. That's where I think we've made the most savings. It's actually on the back end piece.
Have you ever calculated those savings? I mean, have you ever tried to really demonstrate financially what the value of those systems has been for Cisco?
On the M&A side?
Yeah.
I don't know. No is the answer. I don't know that I've seen figures that reflect that. It's a significant sum of money, though.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if for those of you who see bills from law firms for those sort of activities, you know there that there's some tremendous capabilities just based off what that can cost to integrate an acquisition over the space of 6 to 12 months. We spend virtually nothing.
Is that applicable to all acquisitions, or do you have a threshold or a ceiling?
I think you have to try to chunk up the kind of acquisition you're talking about. Certainly for what we call the tech and talent, the smaller ones where there's some great technology coming in and a smaller number of people, and perhaps there isn't really an existing go-to-market in place with customers and product lines and things that are being end-of-lifed and so forth. That's pretty clean and easy to do. But even on the large ones, I think you can break it up in the same way and push it into the right groups and cut out the middle chunk.
It's not always cost or financial savings you look at.
Right.
It's also time. I mean,
yep.
I looked at in M&A, the Adobe switched when they're doing acquisition, well, completely for everything, they switched to electronic signatures for HR. And doing an acquisition where you have to onboard 2,000 employees in, 2 weeks, they went from having it take 2 to 4 weeks to taking 2 to 3 days because they implemented it all digitally with electronic signatures. It's a pretty neat case study. That's a cost that's still hard to quantify, but for the value to the business, just from a reduction in nuisance, it's huge. It's huge.
And a consistency as well.
Right, exactly.
You know,
and audit trails.
Right.
I mean, it's
right.
Yeah.
Well, less risk. Yeah.
I don't know if it's less risk, but you can figure out who's missing. You can figure out who's signed. You can figure out what the issues are very easily.
Okay, well, let me turn it now to our outsourcing colleagues. You guys have really a bird's eye view of what's going on out there. What are some of the projects that are of keenest interest, both within law firms as well as law departments? So I'd be very interested to hear about some of the recent projects that you both have been working on. And Greg, let me start with you.
Yeah, thanks, Dan, and wonderful to be here. Wonderful to be here with my dear colleague and friend Kevin Colangelo. It's sort of like old home week here for Pangea 3. If you don't know, Kevin and I were part of the early leadership team at Pangea 3. One of the Pangea 3 co-founders, Sanjay Kamlani, is also sort of here in the audience. We had an opportunity to have dinner last night, so it's been wonderful. David Perla, the other co-founder, unfortunately is not here, but he's missing a fun time. So I'm going to try and start with sort of two or three kind of themes as I talk sort of through the lens of what I do and what we at Pangea 3 and at Thomson Reuters have done with our corporate legal department clients, right? So I'm not going to talk obviously from the direct, hey, we've done these sorts of initiatives, but we're involved obviously in many technology and other sort of process, workflow, change management types of initiatives within corporate legal departments. So I'll kind of speak through that lens. But I'll start first with a couple of themes. I'll start with the first one just to try and be a little provocative. I know it's post-lunch. I'm a little jet-lagged anyway.
Is that jet lag, you think?
Yeah, or it's something else. Anyway,
Everybody needs to know what time the bars close around here.
Let's not get into detail, please. I think, to be honest, corporate legal departments are embarrassingly behind the times when it comes to adopting technology and innovation. I mean, Cisco, Adobe, Apple, right? You guys are, as you said, like you're at the heart of Silicon Valley, so you're light years, right, ahead of where other corporate legal departments are. But when we're out in the field, like basic blocking and tackling on Wall Street in Midtown Manhattan, people have got their heads, I don't know where, but they are just painfully behind in terms of like very simple technology adoption. But for 2008 and the world changing as a result of the financial crisis, they'd be further behind, right? So that's my first theme. And, you know, to the extent we have any students here in the room or people that think about alternative legal career paths, I think there's good news, frankly, because you know what you're seeing in this audience, right? You're seeing legal technology startups. You're seeing real VC companies interested in legal technology and legal innovation. That's creating massive opportunity for folks that, you know, don't want to follow the typical law firm, you know, to sort of corporate legal counsel path, right? So to the extent you're not up for that traditional path, God bless, because there's going to be plenty of opportunity because corporate legal departments are just woefully behind. So that's my first theme. The second is, and I'm going to steal an analogy from Steve Harmon, Graham, your colleague at Cisco, and I told him when he gave me this analogy that I was going to steal it from him but attribute it to him. So please let him know that I've done that. I'm also going to steal your analogy on the Greenfield and the pathways because I love that, and I will also attribute it to you. He said on one of our prep calls for this, I thought it was a perfect analogy. You can buy Tiger Woods golf clubs, but you can't buy his golf swing, right? So the analogy there is often people believe that innovation via technology is simple, right? I'm just going to go out and buy the Staples Easy Button. I have a problem, and I'm going to buy this piece of technology, and off we go to the races, and I'm going to solve a whole host of painful headaches. Ain't going to happen, right? Ain't going to happen, right? This yellow brick road is sort of littered with, you know, scraps of knowledge management systems, of CRM systems, of contract lifecycle management systems that have not been used, where companies have not gotten the sort of ROI or the value from those technology initiatives or build outs, right? Whether you're building it internally, et cetera. So what Steve and I firmly believe is that when it comes to adopting technology, particularly for these corporate legal departments that are so far behind and who might think, oh, I'm finally going to get up to speed and I'm going to go out and buy this, you know, billing system, you know, analytics, or I'm going to go out and buy, you know, a predictive coding button, right? So I don't have to do document review anymore, right? I'm just going to buy this system, put all the junk in there, hit the button, and, you know, produce to the SEC or the DOJ, and I'm done. Like, for those companies, they have to get serious about project management, about change management, right? About getting stakeholder buy-in that here's what this technology does, and this is how we're going to extract the value out of it, right? It's not just about go out and buy technology. Now, that probably seems obvious to a lot of people in this room because we're sort of preaching to the choir. It's not obvious to a lot of people, right? So when I speak on these kinds of panels, I talk about, you know, you need to know what a RACI model is. You need to know how to make a Gantt chart if you expect, you know, these technology purchases to really deliver the value that you believe are there behind you. So those are my two.
If I may interrupt,
yeah, please.
you, that's very interesting.
It's on a roll
because
there.
You're focused on the implementation of the project itself, which I think is absolutely important. Project management, of course, is at the core.
Yep.
But you also said change management.
Yep.
And change management is really much harder.
Absolutely.
Because it's the soft stuff.
Yeah.
And it goes beyond the implementation of the project. Because someone mentioned a little earlier here, knowledge management systems. And, you know, that's a classic example of where change management really has often failed law departments that have tried to put this in. A knowledge management system, of course, is only as good as the information that's in it.
Absolutely.
And what happens is everybody gets very excited about the implementation of the system, but once implemented, they don't continue to provide the content to make that system so rich and so valuable. And as a result, the system fails. And that's an issue of change management and adaptation. I wonder if you could speak to that.
Yeah, and I'll give you absolutely, and that's where I was headed anyway. So thank you for the segue. I'll use a real live example. And often on these types of panels, you can't do this. Here I can do it because it's public knowledge, public information. The Caterpillar legal department, Caterpillar, they build massive earth-moving machines, right, and sell them all over the world, particularly in developing countries, right? They, as you can imagine, have thousands and thousands of agreements that they enter into on an annual basis with suppliers, with clients, etc. They've got direct procurement, which is when they go out and buy things that make their way into the machines. And then they've got indirect procurement, which is when they have to buy pens and water bottles and what have you that don't go into the machines. Their legal department came up with a plan to begin to streamline the way they did their agreements and drafted and negotiated their agreements. They created a host of swim lanes, if you will, for different levels of kind of importance and risk associated with different types of agreements. And they had a technology platform on which these agreements would be drafted and housed, etc. And then they hired Pangea 3 and a couple of law firms to work on different lanes, right, within the pool that represented different levels of risk and different levels of complexity of agreements. And then they set out to actually do this. And that's the change management part, right? They had the technology, they had the project management piece in place, but they had to sort of get everyone on board. And that's where this engagement became absolutely fascinating, because from the top, Jim Buda, who's the general counsel of Caterpillar, really adopted this and pushed this out. And when we really challenged the legal department at Caterpillar about, you know, why are you guys doing this? Like, what are you really after? Is it just, you know, are you trying to eliminate like internal, you know, lawyers so that you can, you know, you save money? Is it, you know, what's the play here? And very honestly and earnestly, the Caterpillar legal department came back and said, our people are absolutely overworked, particularly at quarter end. So 4 times a year, including, you know, the week, you know, before New Year's Eve and the week of, you know, holiday time, people are absolutely slammed, and we want to take that away. We want to actually create a capacity valve for our people. And when that became the sort of sentiment behind this change, you can imagine, to your point, the soft stuff, people got it and said, okay, Pangea 3 is not, they're not going to take my job. They're going to free me up so that I'm working, you know, 40 hours a week instead of 45 hours a week and, you know, 60 hours a week, you know, at quarter end. That was submitted to the ACC, and we won a corporate the value challenge in 2014 with Caterpillar and with their outside counsel Baker Hostetler, and we were, you know, honored at the, you know, at the ACC meeting in New Orleans last year. But it was all about change management. That was the key.
Yeah, that is often the piece that's missing.
Yep.
And the cultural change within the department or within the law firm.
Yep. Absolutely.
Well,
Absolutely.
Thanks for that. Very helpful.
Yeah.
Kevin, let me ask you the very same question that I asked Greg about anecdotes and examples of recent implementations and what you see as some of the really most interesting projects underway right now.
Yeah, so, you know, I share some of Greg's cynicism about, you know, the state of affairs in large legal departments. Although over the last kind of 14 months, I'm relatively new to Bloomberg. I joined about 4 weeks ago at the behest of David Corrle, who I helped build Pangea 3 with Greg. But before that, I was with a company called Elevate Services. Some of you may know them, some of you may not. But what Elevate did, and it does a lot of different things, but one of the core offerings there was both a consulting service to in-house legal departments as well as specialized software services for legal departments. And I think I'm seeing it a little bit differently, Greg. And it's been a couple of years since you and I worked together, and I think that one of the things that I've noticed is spend is always on the table for something different. And in the area of analytics and understanding outside counsel spend, I think a lot of legal departments are really on top of it. Again, particularly here out in the Silicon Valley area, one of the big clients, publicly known clients of Elevate is a company called NetApp. Some of you guys know Connie Brenton and Matt Fawcett at NetApp. They're doing a lot of the stuff that you all have been doing for the last 15 years. But on the other side of that as well is they're applying a lot of rigor and analytics to their outside counsel spend, which I find fascinating. I find in terms of, so we're all talking about kind of practice side adoption, inputs versus outputs. This is more the business of law or the business of the legal department. And, just a couple of quick examples, not just NetApp, but some other clients where, they have the data. E-billing systems have been in place now for how many? Maybe about 10 years. Yeah. I mean, whether or not they're used correctly, I'll kind of let that sit for another topic. But certainly, the data is out there. You've got companies like TimeMetrics who are aggregating spend, anonymizing spend. And again, it's not determinative of anything, and it is a very small sample set, but it's a lot more than we had before. And you can use it as a starting point. It's like kind of using Google first type thing. Well, let me look at the data for a partner of 15 years experience in labor and employment in Kansas City, and let's try to, and at a firm of 300 or more lawyers, and I can tell you kind of where that spend should be. Yeah. Use that data and then compare it to the in-house data. And the tool that Elevate had was it was really just the interface allowed legal departments to kind of look at this and say, okay, we can look at this from all firms. We can look at it from the firms that we've approved. And so, if you had a panel of, let's say, 20 law firms, you basically put all of your spend data with those law firms into one side of the tool. You take TimeMetrics-like data or any other market-available data that you can get your hands on and combine them and really come up with some really interesting information about how your money's being spent. Now, that's something everybody can get behind. And that's something that, the adoption rate at something like that, it takes a little while, right? Because legal departments don't necessarily have data wonks. They don't have quants running the department. They will. I think they will. I know a few. And in fact, I think the two hottest jobs in the legal sector now, non-attorney jobs, would be legal project manager for law firms and these quant level analytics type jobs for legal departments and law firms as well, although I'm not holding my breath on that one. Right. But the analytics piece and the fact that now you've got the firms being evaluated on quantitative measures as well as qualitative measures, and very strong general counsels and COOs of legal departments. I'm thinking of a couple that come to mind, Marsh McLennan, a guy named Mike Kaplan, who was very instrumental in changing that department, now is the COO at Goodwin Procter. You have to have the fortitude. You have to have the right, and I see it in all of your comments, and I've spoken on panels before with Mark as well, so I know you have to have that fortitude to say, we're going to make some hard decisions about not just how we operate our department vis-a-vis all of the technology tools that may take work off our desks, but we also have to have, we have to be very smart about how we spend our money. And that's something, again, over the last kind of year plus, I've seen a lot of departments being very willing to go down that path. And again, you have to have the data, which is always a challenge. You have to have the fortitude, and you have to know what you're going to do with the outputs, right? Analytics are only so good, only as good as the insights that come from them, and whether or not you act on those insights. Actionable insights is what they call them. You say, okay, one of my last clients was big pharmaceutical, and they had run a set of analytics on their outside spend for IP litigation, and they came up with a dashboard, and the dashboard was very, very easy: red, yellow, green traffic light dashboard. They defined what each traffic light meant, but you could imagine, green, we're happy with them. Yellow, they're on the edge, and red, they're in trouble. And they analyzed all the spend from, I think it was, let's say the top 10 firms. I think 10 was in the chart, but ultimately created this dashboard of about 15 columns, 15 data points that they were able to measure those firms on, and then based on where the data fell, red, yellow, green. In terms of all of these are all quantitative. They added some qualitative measures, and that's for another discussion again, but these were all quantitative measures, and it turned out that their most preferred outside firm, very well-known, very, very, very white shoe firm, had many more reds and yellows than anyone else on the list. but because of their brand, they are always chosen. And so that's your kind of actionable insights. Okay, what do we do with that? Now, what we advise them to do with that, getting a little bit away from the technology discussion for a second, is what we advise them to do with that is take that spreadsheet and put it in front of that firm and say, what are you going to do about that? Now, we all know firms.
Did they do it?
What's that?
Did they do it?
I can't tell the end of the story because it's still ongoing, but I think it got some attention. I think that's a different way of looking at what legal departments can do with their technologies, because spend is an issue for all legal departments. Some want to tackle the issue directly. Some want to sidestep the issue. Some want to push it off to someone else. I'm retiring. I'm no longer going to be the GC in a year and a half. So let's just coast for the next 18 months, and this will be somebody else's problem. But it's always an issue, and I think that the tools that are out there to help with that are much easier to bring to bear than tools in the practice space for all of the reasons that the rest of the panelists have discussed.
Kevin, let me ask you and Greg a question about the adaptation of technology generally, not by law departments, but because this conference is really talking about the use of technology in the law. Be interested in your insights about the adoption of technology, particularly cutting-edge technology by law firms.
Go with that one.
Yeah, I'll start. You want to?
Yep.
Right. You want to?
I think you'll get pretty much 98% of the people in this room absolutely agreeing. In fact, maybe because we have some vendors here, stomping their feet in agreement with your statement about how far behind law departments are.
Yep.
In fact, we here on the panel will stomp our feet as well. Absolutely true. But what about law firms? I mean, there's been obviously a great deal of attention placed on the adoption of new technologies and presenting that to clients as showing the firm to be in the vanguard. What are you seeing?
So on the law firm side, I mean, I'm going to make some sweeping generalizations, right? I would say, first of all, on the corporate legal department side, I feel like there's haves and have-nots, right? Silicon Valley, you guys are there, you've got the technology, you've got the innovative thinking, and then there's almost like just two camps, and there's other, more traditional corporate legal departments that are just woefully behind. I think law firms, I think the picture is much murkier, and there's a lot of different sort of categories for law firms, right? You've got very forward-thinking law firms where technology is just sort of in their bones, right? And that's the case throughout the firm, throughout the partnership, throughout the offices. I think of firms like, Allan and Overy. I mean, the things that they're doing innovatively, right? Creating spin-off companies, creating, their own outsourcing centers, creating,
DLA Piper is another
technology.
one.
DLA Piper is one. Absolutely. That's right.
Thanks for the plug.
I was on a panel. This is kind of funny. This kind of puts this in context. Last week I was in Southern California. I won't go into more kind of detail than that. Southern California at a law firm partnership retreat. 300 partners at a very fancy hotel in Southern California. The whole theme of the retreat, the weekend retreat, was innovation, legal innovation. And it was sort of like, we need to innovate now. And here's this panel. And, there were a panel of 4 outside innovators, myself, somebody from IBM Watson, somebody from Neota Logic, right? And it was sort of like, hey, we really need to get serious about innovation. And in my head, I'm thinking, shit, this conversation is about 10 years too late. I mean, really, guys? Like, now you're going to get serious about innovation?
I think the challenge is, and I continue to be surprised by law firms. So it's easy to come up here and do a little law firm bashing, at how their heads are really stuck in the sand. But I have to tell you, I spent, before Elevate, I was a chief client relations officer at Proskauer Rose. I felt like after a couple of years of disruptive activity, I need to go back where I cut my teeth, go back to the law firm and try to help them be innovative. And I will say that, all of the firms know they have to do something. Sure. Right? How they execute on that is where they diverge. Yeah. Right? But the knowledge is there. Does anyone at Skadden know who Pangea 3 is? Probably. Do you guys at the top of the list when they're talking about we need to do something innovative or we need to bring in Neota Logic? Maybe. But it's not like, oh, okay, Thomson Reuters is here today. Okay, we know what that means. So the kind of the newer generation of technology innovations, or any kind of process-driven improvements, anything that evolves the practice, they are aware of it. They don't have the budgets, first of all. I just had a conversation,
or not that they don't have the budgets. They just don't want to decrease profits per partner.
Okay, you could look
they
at it
have
that
the
way.
money.
Sure.
They just don't want to take it out of their pocket.
We've got two.
Sorry, we weren't going to law firm dash.
No,
I'm sorry.
but I think to
Apologize.
shorten the
Sorry.
to shorten the answer, you have a business model that bleeds out all the cash annually.
Yeah.
So the level of investment, or the willingness to do any level of investing is not second nature. In fact, it's alien. So when sitting at Proskauer and I was very adamant about bringing even some of the people in this room in and parading them past the partners, saying, see what they're doing? See what the Ravel guys are doing? All of these different things. Really interesting stuff, really cool. I have a son graduating college, maybe you can get an internship with them. But well, it's going to cost, to Karen, to your point, it's going to cost this, and we're going to need to change these behaviors, and we're going to need to stick to it.
Right.
That's where law firms fail. And again, I get surprised every once in a while because I see some. Allan Over's a great one. Littler's another one. Seyfarth's another one, where you see that level of investment. And then when you actually, and I would recommend everyone in this room, talk to the leaders of those firms. Because when you talk to the leaders of the firms, they speak very differently than the rest of the law firm leaders. They actually look at this in a way to say, you know what, I might be 63 years old and on the back 9, and maybe I'll have another 8-9 years of practice, but I'm leaving a legacy, and I have a fiduciary duty to my 42-year-old partners to actually help them survive in the next generation. That's the way that the people the firms that are adopting this, that's the way that they think about evolution.
That's absolutely right. I'll just real quickly say that. Our law firm business at Pangea 3 has been the fastest growing part of our business each of the last 3 years. Joe Borstein, who's sitting here, who runs that business for Pangea 3, has done an incredible job partnering with those firms that are forward-thinking, right? The DLA types, not that we're partnering with DLA, but those types of firms, the Allan and Overy, the Holland and Knight, right? Whole host of firms that are being super, super serious about, no, we will innovate. We will make this part of our value proposition, and we'll use it to differentiate against other firms, when we're at the dog and pony show to get the work from Adobe and Apple.
Greg, let's leave it there. I did promise I was going to leave some time for questions, and I would really enjoy hearing your questions. And I apologize in advance if our answers are relatively short, but I'd like to take as many as we can. There's a question right here in the front.
Yeah, my name is Lee Pasadena, and my question is on being a tech champion within the legal office. And do you have any recommendations for taking smaller steps first, as opposed to implementing more sort of robust wholesale system changes that you're talking about, where perhaps there's a particular kind of tool that we can use and show value on a smaller scale as at least
I think that's a good question. I think there are probably a lot of small steps you can take. Electronic signatures is not difficult to implement. That's a really good one that will probably get very quick return and very visible return to people. And if you're unsure of the risk, you can call one of the vendors. Adobe happens to be one. You can go on their website and see the enforceability. They'll come talk to you about. You can talk to lots of people about it, but it's a great one to implement to get instant ROI. So that's the type of thing I think, something like take a small process. I mean, I think process reengineering, I totally agree with you. That is the biggest bang for the buck if you can get it. So take a small process that's causing lots of problems with your customers or with your students or some, and look at what process reengineering you can do with technology, and try that, because you'll get a very quick return.
The one thing I'd add to that as well, and I think this is more and more true today than ever, is don't worry too much about overanalyzing it. If you know there is a compelling value proposition. I mean, we started out with a virtual approval tool because we literally had paper flows going all around Europe when I joined, and it was nuts. And the clients would just say, this is nuts. We knew we were slow getting stuff out of the company. It was just so compelling. It was very, very quick to build. And everybody loved it. It gave us momentum. It gave us, and we didn't spend forever sort of saying, well, what's the ROI? And what if we move this lever? Would it be that? We knew there were savings. We knew there was, to your point, Karen, about time costs that we could pull back in. And so start simple, but just find something that really connects with your constituents.
Yeah, the idea of starting simple, keeping it cheap, and with an immediate payback so that everybody in the company sees it really right away. Just a couple of those, and boy, you're on your way. Then people are going to embrace it. Other questions? Yes, sir, way in the back.
Yeah, I just want to support Karen. I think models don't sell to these futures, but from everything, we don't sell these futures, but from everything we've seen, that's probably the single biggest ROI. There's a tendency in the lawyer, lawyers think about automating the reasoning processes of lawyers. That's very low yield. But looking at all the frictional processes across the company and getting corporate cash down from 72 days to 60 days, that's the payoff. So the e-signatures app is probably the foundational transformational system for corporate legal.
Thanks for that comment. Matt?
I'm Matt Kessler. I'm from West. And I got to say, we feel really blessed to work with Cisco, who wants to do things around technology. Why aren't there more GCs and more companies interested in partnering around technology? Because it seems like a lot of us here, whether you're NG3 or me or others, are offering point solutions where we get a lot more done together. And just one quick example that I find funny and ridiculous is we've received a lot of audits, 100-page audits from financial services firms about IT and IT security, and we do a full amount and send them back. And then I also send back a suggestion: why don't we tie our email systems together so that we can do completely encrypted email between the two? And the response I get is always zero. Why is that? Why are companies willing to start working together with both vendors and law firms? And let's build a microcosm that's better. Sorry.
I would say they.
I'm actually going to applaud that. I think that's great. I think that's
I
great.
would say very few law firms reached out to companies to ask to do that. That would be my response. I think that there are. I don't know where Ralph went, but there are lots of things that could be partnerships in between law firms and companies. And I think there are things. I mean, there are certainly encrypted extranets that people are doing, et cetera. I'm sure everybody's doing those. And there's lots of things you do to ease your. I mean, I'll put my other hat on, and to make things easier for your client. I think there's lots of opportunity there as well. You can't underestimate a little bit the, particularly with all the cybersecurity issues, your IT department's resistance at some point.
One last question. Yes, sir.
Hi, Brad Serwin with eBay. So I went looking around for an e-discovery tool because we were spending a lot of money on it, and I thought there must be a better way. I talked to Chevron, I talked to Disney, I talked to everybody in my own department. We couldn't find anything that was an end-to-end solution, so we started looking for chunks. Couldn't find a chunk that actually worked, so we're building one ourselves. And nobody has been really talking about e-discovery. I'm wondering what your thoughts are about that. Is it too hard a problem to solve, or is it just that nobody solved it really yet?
Greg, I'm going to ask you to pick that one
Yeah,
up.
sure. No, I mean, that's very bold of you to be building your own. God bless. Yeah, you know what? I think we purposely sort of left e-discovery as a topic out of this because I think we thought it was sort of being covered in other parts of today's events. Yeah, look, I think one of the first things, and I was actually going to respond to your question, which was, I think there's a lot of opportunity in the e-discovery context for some quick wins, particularly with companies that are probably, if you do the analysis of your billing, right, like you suggested, if you go to all of your outside counsel and say, give me a list of all the e-discovery vendors that you've used to work on my matters. If you do that through your top 10 litigation outside firms, my guess is you will get back a list of at least a dozen, maybe 24 providers, right? Job one would be to simply reduce those 12 e-discovery providers to 3 and say, Lucky you, you're one of our 3 e-discovery panel providers, and I want to aggregate all of my spend with one of you three providers. And you start negotiating with them directly, you can get enormous savings by doing that. And more than that, you can get a better quality on all of your e-discovery projects because you just went from 24 providers to 3. They could understand processes and they could understand workflows, et cetera. All that could be memorialized. But back to your question, I mean, I think there are providers out there that will give you maybe not everything, right? I think end-to-end e-discovery is a bit of a misnomer. There aren't many providers that really do all of that, but you could probably limit it to a handful of very quality providers that get you the full EDRM continuum from forensic collection through to trial preparation and what have you. They're certainly out there. I'm happy to talk to you afterward and sort of help point you in the right direction.
Well, why don't we leave it there? One of my primary jobs here as moderator is to be sure that this thing ends on time. We will be able to take questions, though, if any of you have questions afterwards. Hopefully our panel can stay here a little bit longer. Would you please, again, try to fill out your evaluation forms, very helpful for Codex, and join me, please, in thanking our panel today.